Today's daf is daf Ayin Hey 75. We're getting close to the end, 2 more weeks of Gittin. But the question yesterday, the discussion yesterday, was that the Mishnah had a case where a man said to his wife, here's a get on condition that you give me something, say $5,000, within 30 days. So it said in the Mishnah, if he gives it during 30 days, it's a get. And if she doesn't, it's not a get, which seems pretty obvious. But the question is, what if she tries to give it to him and he refuses to take it, right? What if day 30 comes around, the husband doesn't want to get divorced, he made this condition, but he changes his mind. So he says, I don't want your money, or he runs away and hides, right? So what does she do in that case if she can't fulfill the condition? Hold on one second. Okay, leave it a try. So we bring a case from this Masechta from Erech. It's not Hatam. So let's start there with the sixth line, the first wide line on the bottom of Daf Ayin Daled Amud Bet. It's not Hatam. We learned there in Erechen, the end of Erechen. Barishona, remember there's halacha that back in the old days, in times of Yovel, when a person bought a house in a Batei Arei Choma, you bought a house in a walled city, you were allowed to, the seller of the house was able to redeem his house or her house and get it back within 12 months. You had a 12-month sort of, I don't know how you call it, like a conditional time. As long as you gave back the money, you can move back into your house within 12 months. But the 12 months passed and you didn't give back the money. So you sold your house for $100,000. You didn't take the money back. You didn't repay it within 12 months. So you lose the house forever, right? So you could see that this would be a very uncomfortable thing. Like people would be buying from vulnerable people who need the money, but hoping that they don't pay them back potentially. In any event, the truth is, even if they pay you back, you lived in the house rent-free. So the Gemara discusses all these details. But the halacha is you have to do it by the last day of the year. And of course, says the Gemara, Barishona, and this is the Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Daled Amud Bet, the first of the wide lines. Barishona, originally, back in the old days, meaning Hayonitzman Yom Shnei Masar Chodesh, they would hide on the last day of the 12th month, meaning people would hide in order to avoid being paid back so they can keep the house. Again, the case is that I sold my house, someone pays me back within 12 months, they have to let me move back into if I pay them back within 12 months, I get to move back into my house. But if I don't, I can never get my house back, right? And so the person I sold it to wants to stay in the house and he would avoid me on the end of the month, on the 12th day of the month. So the Kadesh Yeh Chaluta, so it'd be free to that person. Because of that situation, Hitkin Hillel Azakain, Shei Cholesh et Mo'otav Lishka, you would pass over your money to the bank account, meaning Rabbi Gamliel made a takana, Hillel, sorry, made a takana that they had a bank account. It wasn't really a bank account, right? But a chamber where you could put your money, deposit your money. It sounds like a bank account. And then you basically bought back your house. So you take your $1,000, you give it to the bank, even if you can't find the guy, and then the house is yours. And if he locked it up, you can break down the door, go back into your house because now it's yours again. Whenever the other person wants to show up and take the money, he's free to come take the money. But basically, Hillel made a takana that, again, this is very similar to our Mishnah in some ways, right? Our Mishnah said that you're going to give a get on condition that you pay a certain amount within, say, 30 days. You can even make it a year, it doesn't matter. And so the question is, if the husband in this case, doesn't accept the money, what happens? So you see here, from the case of Batei Arei Choma, that in a similar situation, we had to pay within 12 months. If the person doesn't accept the money, what happens? In fact, it seems like you can't force them to take the money until Hillel came and made a takana. So it says the Gemara, where are we? 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rava. Rava made a comment, mitakanato shel Hillel, from the fact that Hillel made this takana, Nishma, you can see that a person who says, now go back to our Mishnah, if a person says to his wife, here's a get on condition that you pay me $200, and she then pays him. If it's midato, if he says, okay, thank you, I accept it, migureshet, then she's divorced. But if it's al karcho, eno migureshet. But if it's against his will, then she's not divorced. Meaning, you cannot force him to accept the money, even though you made the condition. And where do you see that from this case? From the bottom line now. Hillel had to institute this rule that if you give the money to the buyer, against their will, meaning they're not even there, it counts as giving it to them. And the implication is the Michlal, top words of Daf Ayin Hayam and Aleph, Michlal de Ba'alma, it must be that in general, Nitina Bal Karche lo havi Nitina. It must be that in general, if you give money and the person doesn't willingly accept it, it doesn't usually count. They made an exception, but they are a choma because they didn't want people not to sell their houses and not to have commerce. So whatever the reason was, they made an exception there. The fact that they made an exception there proves the rule. And the rule is that you can't force someone to accept the money. And so now it's a really bad issue, right? Which is a problem, which is in our Mishnah, a husband says, I'll divorce you on condition you pay me. If he changes his mind, doesn't want to accept the money, she has nothing to do. She can't force him to take it. So you see that from this rule. That's what Rava said. Matkefler of Papa, or second line on Daf Ayin Hayam and Aleph, Aster of Papa, Vitamer of Simi Barashi, how can you prove it from there at all? The case of Batei Arechoma, the person left town, right? They're not there. Maybe when Hillel had to make a takana ishalo b'fanav, there's no one here to accept the money. So Hillel had to make a takana, which was a brand new takana that you could pay by proxy essentially without the person knowing about it. But maybe b'fanav, if the person was actually there, you can pay them bein midato bein bal karcho. Even if the person says, I don't want to accept your money, you could say, tough, here's the money. And so maybe the same thing would be true by a get, having nitina. So therefore, you cannot prove from this case of Batei or Eichoma, where the person fled town and Hillel made a takana that you could pay the money to the bank account and it will count. You can't prove about whether if a wife or wants to be an ex-wife, but wife gives the money to her husband, even if he says, I don't accept it from you, it could be that she would still be divorced because she fulfilled her condition. And now we're still 5 lines from the top of Ayin Hayam and Aleph. Ika the Amri, some say it the opposite way. That in fact, said Rava, mitakanato shel Hillel, from the takana of Hillel by Batei Arei Choma, what you can actually see is that a man who says to his wife, here's your get on condition you give me 200 zuz, vinatna lo, and she gives it to him, that she fulfilled the condition, bein midato, bein bal karcho. Whether she gave it to him willingly, meaning he accepted it, or he said, I don't want it, but she threw it at him, or gave it to his account, havi nitina. You see that no matter what, whether the person acquiesced or not, if you paid what you had to pay, that counts as giving it, and she's divorced. And he hits Hillel, the Tukune, when Hillel had to make the special takana, was only shalom b'fanav. Only in the case of Batei or Choma, where on the last month of the year, last day of the year, the people who owned the house fled, right? They left town. So there's no one there to pay it to. Aval b'fanav, but if the person's actually there, she finds her husband, of course it is a problem if her husband flees town, but as long as she finds him, bein bidato, bein bal karcho havi nitina, whether you give it willingly, whether the husband says, I want to accept it, or he says, I don't want to accept your money, it doesn't matter, she gave it to him. And asked Rav Papa, again, it's the same question, but in the inverse, maybe even if the person standing there is midato in abal karcho lo, and Hillel made the takana because that was what happened. Meaning Hillel was reflecting the reality that people would run away, people would travel. But maybe Hillel would have said the exact same thing, even if the person was there in front of you. And so essentially you can't prove, according to Rav Papa, from Hillel one way or the other. So we leave this situation, we're done with this question, we don't have a resolution about whether, in fact, a person who says, here's a get, on the condition you give me $200, and the wife comes to give him $200, and he says, I don't want to accept your money. So we leave unknown the question of whether she can force him or give it to him bal karche and say it still counts. So we don't have a resolution of that question. Continues the Gemara now. We are third of the way down. We quoted this yesterday. There's a star in my Gemara. It should be in everyone's Gemara because this is a very, very famous quote. One of the rules that now is going to take with her to next year, which is Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Reb Yochanan, said Rabba bar bar Chana, the name of Reb Yochanan, Kol makom sheshana Reb Shimon ben Gamliel b'mishnatenu. Wherever we have Rashbag in our Mishnah, in a Mishnah, not necessarily in a Braita, halacha kemoto. We always pass like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel whenever he's quoted in a Mishnah, except for 3 exceptions. Chutz mi arev. One exception is the case of arev, which means a guarantor. This was a case that we've had where a person essentially says to I go and I buy a house and I say I'm going to pay you whatever $1 million and here's my guarantor. So if the guarantor says I will pay even if the person can pay, there are exceptions to that rule. So anyways, different halacha. Tzidon, the case of Tzidon, which is a case in our Mishnah. Again, we're going to get back to it, but the really important case here of Tzidon was where a person said to his wife, I'll divorce you on condition that you return to me my beautiful coat. And the wife lost the coat. So according to the Tanna Kama, which is not mentioned in our Mishnah, but we imagined a Tanna Kama, she is not divorced because he literally said, I want this coat. If there's no coat, there's no divorce. And according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it just means the value. If you lost the coat, you paid the $1,000 that it cost to buy a new coat, and she gets her divorce. And we don't paskin like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in this case. And the third case, which we also discussed a little bit yesterday, is Raya Achrona, meaning you bring your final proofs. It's a case in Sanhedrin, actually, where they go to court, they're arguing about something, and the court says to the man, do you have any further evidence? And he says, I have no further evidence. So this is my last proof. And then 3 weeks later, of course, he finds further evidence. So can you come back and bring new information after you said you had no information? So that's a third case. So anyways, that is an important halacha about our Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan continues the Braita, this is a Tosefta here. Harei ze gitech. Let's say a husband says to his wife, not a very nice guy, I would say in this case, but there might be other circumstances, I guess. Here is your get, but I want the paper back. Haniyar shali. The paper is mine. Let's just say they had very little paper. He wanted to use the back. I don't know. It had a drawing, a Picasso on the back, right? So here's the get, but I want you to give me the paper is mine. Okay. Says the Braita, Eino Migureshet, because he didn't give her a get. He basically said, you can have the words on this, but you can't have the get. It's not her get. You have Natan La. You have to give it to her. So he didn't give her the get. But if he says a condition, here is your get, Al minat shetachziri li et hanayar, on condition that you give it back to me. So then Migureshet. Then she is divorced because he gave it to her. She might have to give it back to him. But at the time he gave it to her, let's say she's divorced. Now ask the Gemara, that's the Braita. Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. What's the difference? Why, if you say, here's your get, and I own the paper, she's not divorced. But if you say, on condition that you give it back to me, she is divorced. Either way, the husband is demanding the paper back. So says Rav Chisda, it's two Tanaim. It's a machloket Tanaim. Hamani, sorry, it's not two Tanaim. It is Rav Chisda says its money is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That the Tana of this Braita is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who said about the coat that if a husband makes a condition, here is get on condition you give me back this coat, and she lost the coat, she can give him the money. So here too, he says, here is the get on condition that you give me back the paper. She doesn't have to give him back the paper. She can say, look, the paper's worth $1. I'll give you $1. And so therefore, that's why if he makes a condition, she's divorced because she can always pay the value. If he says, I own the paper, she's not divorced. So how many Reb Shimon ben Gamliel he damar titein lo et tameh, where Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says by the coat, you can give him the value of the coat. Hachanami efshar d'mafaisa le'b'demei. Here too, even though he made a condition that you have to give me back the paper, and if she gets to give him back the paper, it's not a divorce. She doesn't own the get. But that's not the case here. Here too, because Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says you can give the value, she's allowed to give back the value of the paper, which is probably $1, let's say, or $10 or whatever, and therefore she can be divorced. Okay, Matifla Abaya, no, asked Abaya on this statement of Rav Chisda, how could that be? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel heicha deleta be'enei. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said if the husband made a conditional on returning the coat and she lost the coat, he can give her the value. But here, he made a conditional on giving me back the get, and she's holding the get in her hand. She can't say, I don't care about your condition, I'm going to give you $5, right? Reb Shimon only said it, when the object is not intact, she lost it. But did Reb Shimon Gamliel say that even if it's there, husband says, I divorce you on condition, you give me back my car. And the car's there. She can't say, I don't want to give you the car, I want to give you the money. She's got to give back the object that he demanded. So here too, why according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel would the condition not be valid, and therefore it shouldn't be a get, right? Because again, he gave her the get on condition that you give it back to me. If it's on condition you give it back to me, she has to get. It's only a get once she gives it back to him. Once she gives it back to him, she doesn't have the get anymore. So it's what we call catch-22, right? She can't have the get and give it back to him at the same time. El Amar Abaya says about, you know what? You made a whole mistake in this. Hub money, the reason why it works, why it is a get, if he says, here's your get on condition that you give it back to me, is because it's Rabbi Meir. The Amar of the Inan Tnai Kaful. The Meir is of the opinion that in order for a Tnai to be effective, you have to double it, meaning you have to say, if here's your get on condition that you give it back to me, and if you don't give it back to me, it's not a get. And if you don't say that, the Tnai Kaful, that if you do it, this is what happens. If you don't do it, this is what happens, then it's as if you made no Tnai, and we just ignore your condition. So then he said, Hareza Gittin, here's your get on condition, but you said the condition wrong. And so there's no condition whatsoever. And so therefore, in the second case, when you made a condition, you didn't do it properly. You didn't double your condition. And we're about to go through, of course, we've done this before a little bit, but this is a very important sugya because we're about to go through what you need in order to make a condition. Because the famous condition in the Torah that we had a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, was the condition of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, right? Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven came to Moshe and said, we don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. We want land in Abraham. And Moshe gets angry at them, and then he, of course, talks to them. And they have this long discussion about if you go over, im ayavar chalutzim, if you go over and you fight, then you get the land. And if you don't go over and fight, you don't get the land. And so that's how we know you need Tnai Kaful, right? Because Moshe says both. He says, if you go, you get it. And if you don't go, you don't get it. But there are other conditions, there are other nuances that are added there. It's not enough to have a Tnai Kaful. And that's Rava's question now, around 10 lines from the bottom. Matkifla Rava, asked Rava on Abaya, Taima de lo kafle Tnai. You make it sound like the reason the Tnai doesn't count is because you didn't double it. You didn't repeat it. But if you had repeated it, Ha-kafle Tnai lo havigita would not be a get. Because if the husband said, here is your get on condition that you give it back to me, and if you don't give it back to me, it's not a get, according to you, Abaya, that's not a get. But still, you didn't fulfill the Tnai, because you didn't say the Tnai the right way. Because Michti, look into it. How do we know that you can make a condition and have it have effect? But remember, Mahatam, the specific thing in the Tnai Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven, a second detail. So remember, one detail is that they repeated it, but a second detail is that you need a Tnai Kodem L'Maaseh. You needed to say that the condition before the effect. Meaning, Moshe said to them, if you cross over, then you inherit the land. He didn't say, you can get the land as long as you cross over, right? And you always need to say the condition before the Tnai, because the condition is the Tnai, before the action, right? And if you say it the opposite way, it doesn't work. So here, what did he say? He said, Hareza Gittin, which is the action, if you do such a thing, which is not effective, right? Af kol Tnai kodem l'maaseh. When you want to make an effective Tnai, you have to say the condition first. If you pay me $1,000, I'll give you my car. If you do this, you can go over to Eretz Yisrael. If you do this, you can get a get. But la fuke hacha, that would exclude this case. De maaseh kodem l'tnai. The action, he said, that's the fact. This is your get. He said that before he made the condition. Elamar Rava, in fact, that's the reason why it works here, why she's divorced. Mishum de maaseh kodem l'tnai, because we don't accept this condition, meaning the condition of, here is your get on condition that you give it back to me. He said, here's your get. Once he says, here's your get, there's no more conditions. So therefore, she's divorced, and she doesn't have to give it back because it doesn't take effect. Matkifla Rav Ada bar Ava, 5 lines from the bottom, Master Rav Ada bar Ava, I got another detail. You're making it sound like the only thing that matters here is that first you have to repeat it, say the positive and the negative. If you do it, you get it. If you don't do it, you don't get it. And you have to put the action, the condition, not the action, before the Tnai. You have to give it back to me, and then it will be a get, and you have a get. But that is taima, you're making it sound like that's the only thing that's needed. That the maaseh kodem l'tnai. You need to have the action before the tnai, hareza gitech, and that's why it didn't work. Ha-tnai kodem l'maaseh lo havigita, right? If you had said it the other way, if you had said, if you return this paper to me, this is your get, right? Then it would be a get. Michti, but still, that's not enough either. Because kol tnai me'echa gamrina lehu mi tnai b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven, the same formulation. Right? What's the text case? What's the proof case for all conditions in the Torah? the condition, the argument of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, not the argument, the condition of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain. And Ma'atam, think about it. Another detail that's very important by Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain is that Tana'ai b'davar achad u'ma'aseh b'davar acher. Right? The condition was about one action, and the effect was about something else. Meaning, the condition was go fight as the stormtroopers, right? Go fight in the Chalutzim, and the action was you inherit land in Jordan, right? Those have nothing to do with each other. They're not. One is not dependent on the other. If you do X, you'll get Y, and that's where you can make it t'nai. But here, think about it. Afkol afuke hacha. You have to, excluding the case here, turn the page to Daf Ayin Hey Amud Bet. Did t'nai b'maaseh b'davar echad. The way here, if you think about it, the condition and the act are the same thing. Meaning, the man says to his wife, "Here is your get, but you have to give it back to me." So essentially, the condition is give it back to me. The action is here it is, and so those things are inherently contradictory, right? You can't do both. It's impossible. You can't give something and say, "I want it back." Right? Because then it's meaning, well, you can do it later. You can say, I want it back in 30 days. That's a different question. But you can't make it happen simultaneously. You can't say, I will give this to you when you give it back to me, right? Which is inherently contradictory. And so therefore, Ela Amar Rav Ada bar Ava on the top line, second line, Mishum Ditznai u'maseh b'davar echad. The reason why she's divorced here is because the condition is nonsensical. It's contradictory to the thing you're giving. And so when that happens, we just throw out the condition and it's just the action. So you said, you're divorced, here's your get, but you got to give it back to me. Since those things cannot both be true, we ignore the condition and we say, here is your get, and she's totally divorced. So those are the three conditions of a t'nai that we learned. There's more, but these are the three main ones. You've got to be kafle l't'nai. We're going to see a fourth in a second. You have to repeat it. Say, if you do it, you get it. And if you don't do it, you don't get it. You have to do the condition before the action. You have to say, if you give me this back to me, then you're divorced. You can't say you're divorced if you give it back to me. And the third one is that you can't make a condition that contradicts your gift, right? And if you do, we throw out the condition. Says Rav Ashi, I got a whole nother explanation for this business. Nothing to do with all the Tanaim. Rav Ashi says, third line, Hamani Rebbe. You know what? In fact, this Tana is Rebbe. The Amar, we had this yesterday. Amar Rafuna Amar Rebbe. Kol Homer Alminat Gomer Me'achshav Dami. Anyone who says the words Alminat, it's as if they're saying you can have it right now. Meaning, he says to her, here is your get on condition that you give it back to me. But when he said, here it is, he meant you have it right away. And the condition happens maybe later. And therefore, she is divorced right away. So that's one easy way out of it. Now, says the Gemara, because these Tanaim are so complicated, right? Because in order to make a proper Tanai, you need all these conditions. And remember, we had this earlier many times, that one of the times that people would often give Gittin in a rushed circumstance would be if they are dying. Or going to war is actually a good answer too, but the answer is more likely is dying, right? So there's not a lot of time to plan because you can't really predict your illness. And you want to free your wife from having to do Yibam or Chalitza, right? If someone has a brother and they don't have children, or whatever reason, you want to get divorced. So Shmuel made a takana and said, look, anyone who's dying and wants to give a get to their wife, make sure you say it the right way. Because remember, you only want to divorce her if you die, right? If you don't die and you get better, you want to stay married, right? So you want to make a conditional divorce. I will divorce you if I die from this illness. We've had this many, many times, right? But you've got to say it the right way. Remember, you need all these conditions. You've got to say the positive and the negative. You've got to say the action before you got to say the Tanai before the action, and you've got to do it in the right sequence. So Shmuel said, here's what you should say. Hitkin Shmuel, Atkin Shmuel, Begita D'Shchiv Meira. Shmuel made a takana that when you write a get for a person who's sick, very sick, then he should say the following: Im lo mati, if I don't die. Remember, he's doing the right thing here because he's saying the condition before the action, right? If I don't die, lo yehe get, there should be no get. The imati, and now the Tanai kaful, if I do die, yehe get. If I do die, it should be a get. So that's how you should say it. Again, you have to double it, if I don't and if I do, and you should first say the condition and then say the action. Says Gemara, but why are you saying if I don't die, it should not be a get? seems a little bit more reasonable to say what you're doing first. So why don't you say, if I die, this is a get. And if I don't die, it's not a get. Lema imati yehi get vim lo mati lo yehi get. Well, because it's really, no one loves going around saying, this is going to happen if I die. No one loves to talk about their imminent demise, right? So the lomatim inish pronuta nafshe. No one really wants to bring up and mention something bad about themselves, something horrible about themselves. And so therefore, you don't want to say it that way. Says, well, okay, but why don't you say it? Lema lo yehe get im lo mati, right? Why don't you say the beginning, right? Well, it's a really funny question, but why don't you say it the opposite? So we say, as we know, because we learned today's daf, be'inan t'nai kodem lemasa. You need to have the condition first. So you can't say it shouldn't be a get if I don't die. You should say, if I don't die, it should not be a get. Matgif Rava. Now Rava asks, but the problem with Shmuel is that you don't fulfill the fourth condition, which we haven't said yet, of Tanai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain. Look, where do we derive the rule of conditions? And Mahatam hein kodem lelav. There, Moshe said the positive before the negative, meaning Moshe said, if you go back to the Psukim, you'll see this, if you cross over, you will get the land. And if you don't cross over, you don't get the land. So you always have to say what will happen before you say what doesn't happen. How here can you say, if I don't die, it won't be a get, and if I do die, it will be a get, right? You've got to say the opposite. You've got to say first the hein. You've got to say, if I die, it will be a get, and if I don't die, it won't be. So afkol afukia hacha is not the same to lav kodem lahin. You said negative before the positive. Ela Amar Rava, this is what you should say. You should say it 3 times. Okay, it's a very important lesson for anyone who may die and needs to write a get. Im lo mati, if I don't die, lo yehi get. Now that's not a condition. That's just a throwaway. That's just like an introduction. I hope I don't die, and therefore there's no divorce happening here. But now starts the condition. But im mati, if I do die, says the sick man, yehi get. There should be a get. And then you have to add the negative clause. Im lo mati lo yehi get, right? If I die, don't die, it should not be a get. So basically say it 3 times, right? Because first you don't want to start off by saying if I die, it sounds negative. So you start off with an introductory paragraph, which really doesn't mean anything. I hope I don't die and this is not a get. Now make the condition, right? So it says the Gemara, and I'll read it 3 lines from the Mishnah. Im lo mati lo yehi get, because lo mati minish pronut to the nafsh. You first want to start by saying, I hope I don't die. And then you make the conditions. Im mati yehi get, im lo mati lo yehi get, because be'inan hein kodem lelav, you need the positive, meaning the actual thing that will happen, which is that if he does die, there'll be a get, before the negative or the not happening, which will not be a get. So that's how you should say it if you're in that situation. Okay, so we're up to the Mishnah, new start on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Bet. Says the Mishnah, what if, and these were probably very common scenarios in that world where a husband, in many cases, or men, I would say in many cases, relied on women to do many domestic affairs, like today when it's 50-50, right? Says the Mishnah, Hareze gitech, a man says to his wife, okay, I know you want to get divorced, here's your get. But, my father lives with us and he's an old man, and I can't take care of him. And so I'm giving you this get on condition that you continue to be a caregiver for my father. That you continue serving and taking care of my father. Oh, the other people you have to take care of are children. Or she says, right, on condition that you nurse my child. I need you to nurse the kid. I can't have you running away. No one's going to nurse the kid. The kid's going to die or not have enough nourishment. So you can have your divorce, but on condition that you continue to nurse this child. Says the Mishnah, Kamahi manikato. Now, if it's the father, unfortunately, maybe or fortunately, she's got to support him for the rest of his life. And really, it's possible, we'll see this in the Gemara, that her divorce does not happen until the father dies, because she didn't fulfill the condition until the end of his time, right? But for a kid, you obviously don't nurse a kid forever. So how long do you have to nurse a kid? Kamahi manikato. Till what age? Any votes, Evie? Kamahi manikato. So how long do you have to nurse the child? Shtei shanim, 2 years. So the baby is 24 months old, or 2 years. The Yehuda says, Shmona Asar Chodesh, no way, that's much too long, 18 months, year and a half. Now, let's say, continues the Mishnah, Meita ben, Osha Meita av. Let's say the son dies, before that time, let's say, or the father dies, whatever time it is, Hariza gate. So then the get is effective as soon as the condition is over. The condition was take care of the father. There's no more father. You met your condition. So that's the Mishnah. That's the first case in the Mishnah. Second case in the Mishnah is Hareza gitech amanat shetishamshi et abba shtei shanim. Let's say you make a time limit. She's like, I'm not serving your father forever, right? I'm not being stuck here. I'll give you 2 years. Okay? I will commit to 2 years. Or you make a condition. You have to stay and nurse this child for 2 years. So then, says the Mishnah, if meita ben shemeta av, if let's say, I'm adding those words from the Rush, by the way, from the Rif, actually, if the son or the father dies during that time, so you didn't fulfill your condition, but wasn't your fault, or the father says, you know what, I don't want this woman coming around anymore. I don't want her anymore. Now, however, of course, it has to be not because she annoyed him to make him drive him mad, right? So that's mishlo b'hakpada. It wasn't her fault. He changed his mind. He wants to be independent. He doesn't want her coming around anymore. So there's no more responsibility. Says the Mishnah, ain't no get. She's not divorced because the condition was that she does the work for this amount of time. If you don't do the work, you don't fulfill the condition. And so she's not divorced. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel then says, no, because that get, that she is divorced. Remember, we always pass on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, right? She is divorced because Klal Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Kol akava she'ena himena hariza get. Anything that impedes the action that's not her fault, right? Then it's a get. He said, on condition that you serve my father for 2 years. The father said, I'm not interested. So it's not her fault. She didn't cause this, right? Again, it has to be where she didn't cause it, right? She didn't cause it. And therefore, it is still a get because she fulfilled the condition to the best of her ability. Now, says the Gemara, 1 second. Do you really need to nurse this kid for 18 months, for 24 months, to serve the father for 10 years if he lives for that long? There's another Braita which says, Shimashto yom echad, if she does 1 day of service for the father, or hinikato yom echad, she nurses the kid for 1 day, hareza get. Condition was, you've got to help my father. You've got to nurse my kid. If she does it once, 1 day, that's enough. That she met the minimum requirement. So our Mishnah made it sound like you can't. You need to do it forever, for 2 years. Amar Chisda lo kasha. It's a machloket tanaim. Harabanan, harab Shimon ben Gamliel. Our Mishnah is going to, remember, we had a statement earlier today, which I think was very important, where a man said to his wife, I'll divorce you on condition you give me back my beautiful shirt. And she says, I lost it. So according to the Chachamim, she's not divorced because she had to fulfill the condition. You take conditions literally. According to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, you take it the spirit of the condition, which is the shirt. And if you don't have the shirt, give the money, right? Here it has the opposite implication because here the husband said to her, I want you to nurse my kid for 2 years, right? I want you to nurse my kid, right? According to the Chachamim, that it's the spirit. I want you to give him some sustenance. Once you've fulfilled that, you're divorced, even 1 day. According to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it's the actual spirit behind what he said, not literal, right? And the spirit is, I want you to feed the kid until he no longer needs food anymore. And therefore, you've got to do it for his whole childhood or the whole year and a half or 2 years. So, says the Gemara, L'kasha Rabbanan, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Matnita Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Mishnah is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that you take it literally. Sorry, not literally. You take it spirit, like the idea behind it. And the idea is, I want you to nurse the kid. And so you've got to fulfill it until the kid no longer needs to be nursed, or the husband or the father no longer needs support. Ubraita Rabbanan, who say that you take not the spirit, but the literal meaning, and literal meaning of, here's your get on condition you nurse my child, nurse the kid once, here's your get. That's the Gemara, 1 second. That it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that the first Tana in the Mishnah is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, because who showed up at the end of our Mishnah? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. So it can't be him talking, and all of a sudden he says, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says. I mean, to say for Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Havim Michlal Dereisha Lav Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. You can't say our Mishnah is Rashbag if the end of the Mishnah quotes Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Ella, you have to say the opposite. It's not literal and it's not spiritual, literal and figurative. Thank you. It is whether or not you look at conditions as being strict or lenient. right? According to the Chachamim, if a person makes a condition, you hold them to it. According to Shimon Gamliel, you can be lenient. You can give the value of the shur. Here too, when you make a condition, here's your get on condition, you nurse my child. Do you mean nurse my child for their entire life that they need to be nursed, or even a little bit, right? So here it's the opposite. That Ella Reb Braita, Reb Shimon Gamliel to Mekel B'Tnai. Reb Shimon Gamliel is Mekel. He says you do the minimum. And the minimum here is you nurse the kid once, or you feed the father once. And the Mishnah is Rabbanan, who say you've got to take more maximum, and you've got to do it for the life of the father or the full nursing span of the kid of 18 or 24 months. Rava says, I have a whole different answer to reconcile the Mishnah and the Braita. Kan bistam, kan b'mifaresh. Depends on whether you say, here, nurse my kid, or you say, nurse my kid for 2 years. If you say 2 years, then you got to do 2 years, right? If you just say it's stam, then it is just it's the opposite way. The opposite. If you say stam, it means forever. If you mefaresh, I want you to nurse my kid even a little bit, then that's enough. All you have to do is a little bit. Okay. That is, did I say it? I don't know if I said it the right way. Let me say it again. The Mishnah is stam. The Mishnah is where you say nurse the child. So we don't know what that means. This Mishnah means the full life, 18 months, 24 months. The Braita is where you say, I want you to just do it, a little bit. You mefaresh a little bit. Rav Ashi says that I'm going to go further than Rava. Kol stam nami ki mefaresh yom echad dami. It's further. If you just say stam, in fact, you don't have to do 2 years. If you say nurse the kid, you mean a minimum amount of time. The only time you have to do more than a day is if you say, I want you to nurse my child for 12 months, for 24 months, for pick a time. So you have to pick a time for it to be longer. Now, it's not. Let's go back to our Mishnah and see if that makes any sense. Because our Mishnah said, Kamehi menikato, how long does this wife who wants to get divorced have to nurse the child? Shtei shanim. Or Rabbi Yehuda says 18 months, right? But understand, Bishlam the Rava nicha. Because Rava says that if you say stam, then you have to do the maximum period. And the question of the Mishnah is, what's the maximum period? Right? But according to Rav Ashi, if you say stam, nurse my kid, it means 1 day. What are they talking about? It should be good enough to do 1 day. That's where, no. You misunderstood the Mishnah. When I said, how long do you have to nurse the kid? You don't have to nurse them every day for 18 months. It means how long is a kid still nursing? What if the woman goes away, right? The husband gives a divorce to his wife and says, on condition that you come back and you nurse the child. And she says, well, I've got a trip planned to Siberia. I'm on my way. And she gets on the next boat. She goes to Siberia and she comes back 3 years later from her excavation. And she says, okay, I'm ready to nurse the kid. But the kid is 5 years old now, right? She says, it's not my fault he's 5 years old, right? So that's the Mishnah is talking about. You got to do 1 day in the first 2 years of the kid's life. Once the kid is older than 2 years, there's no nursing that's relevant. Or lafuke after 2 years, you can't do it anymore. Delo or yom echad mishmonasar chodesh according to Rabbi Yehuda, lafuke lachar chodesh delo. After 18 months, you no longer have a window to fulfill your condition. So that's, according to Rav Ashi, our Mishnah is not referring to what I said when I read the Mishnah, which was Rava. It's referring to you only have to do 1 day, but that day has to occur in the child's first 18 or 24 months, because that's where it's relevant, where the kid actually benefits from being nursed. Let's do one more question. Meitvei. Hareze gitech, this again is another Braita. A man says to his wife, here is your get, 3 lines from the bottom. Al menat shetishamshi et abba shtei shanim. Right? It's actually not our right. This is the end of our Mishnah, right? On condition that you work for my father for 2 years, or or you nurse my child for 2 years, and then before 2 years happens, what happens? The father dies. Meita ben or meita av, I added from the Rif. Osha amar av, or as the Mishnah said, the father says, I don't really want this woman coming around anymore. Said our Mishnah, ain't no get. It's not a divorce. Like Bishlama, top line of that Ayin Vav, the Rava. I get it. The reason why it's not a divorce is because the reason in the Reisha, it is a divorce when the person dies is bidelo parish. You didn't specifically say how long you want them to do it, which means do it until they die. And Seifa bid parish, you said 2 years. And if they died before 2 years, you didn't fulfill your 2 years. El Rav Ashi, according to Rav Ashi, when you say stam, it's as if you were mefarish 1 day. right? So Maishna Resha or Maishna Seifa, why in the beginning when you said Stam, which is as if you said 1 day, what if the kid dies before you even nursed him for 1 day, right? So then according to Rav Ashi, you shouldn't be divorced, but the Mishnah said you are divorced and kasha. We don't have an answer for Rav Ashi. You can of course answer that. It's very unlikely that the child will die before even 1 day has passed, but unfortunately that does happen. And so we don't have a resolution. And so where we are, we're going to pick this up tomorrow. I think Miriam is picking this up tomorrow, correct? So from the third line will be another braita to try to resolve this question of if you say, here's your get on condition that you support my father. What's the minimum amount of time that the woman has to do that in order for it to be effective get? And we will pick that up tomorrow. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Ellie.
Shabbat Tov. Thank you.
Have a great week.
You too.